There is a central, deeply romanticized phrase that, well, it really permeates our culture. You see it everywhere, from epic poems to blockbuster movies, I love you so much it hurts.
Mm-hmm.
We're so often conditioned to believe that this intense, all-consuming passion and this willingness to sacrifice everything for a connection,
Yeah.
that is the gold standard of romantic love.
And that's the thing, that very concept, that intensity equals quality. That's exactly where the greatest danger lies.
Right.
While intense love, I mean, in a healthy context, can absolutely be inspiring. It can uplift us, bring immense joy.
Mutual joy.
Mutual joy, exactly. But when that feeling becomes excessive, when it becomes demanding and just utterly all-consuming, it stops being love in any constructive sense.
So what does it become?
It transforms into a psychological prison. It leads directly to misery, to profound obsession, and that devastating feeling of being entirely out of control of your own life.
This is a deep dive into that crucial and often really blurry turning point. We're aiming to give you the psychological toolkit to look clearly at a dynamic and differentiate that healthy, supportive, expansive love.
From an unhealthy, constricting fixation.
Exactly. Our goal is to lay out the concrete, practical, and sometimes subtle signs that signal a destructive dynamic, and maybe provide a clear roadmap back to personal sovereignty, self-awareness, and balance.
Because ultimately, this knowledge is about protecting your identity. It's about your energy and your self-worth and preventing them from being completely subsumed by another person's presence.
Right. You deserve a relationship.
But you are not required to vanish into it.
Okay, let's unpack this. Let's start with that foundational distinction, because love and emotional dependence,
Yeah.
they're maybe the two most frequently confused feelings in human experience.
Oh, absolutely. It's just incredibly easy to mistake a desperate, almost terrifying need for that profound, beautiful affection we're all looking for. So when you feel that surge of overwhelming emotion, how do you sort it out? How do you separate healthy attachment from just a survival mechanism?
It's a magnificent confusion, and it's primarily because both states involve these really powerful attachment feelings.
Yeah.
But the core difference is rooted entirely in the underlying emotion that's driving the relationship forward.
Okay.
Healthy love is built on a foundation of freedom, of mutual respect, and genuine choice. You choose to be there and you choose to stay.
It's an active choice.
It is. Emotional dependence, on the other hand, is built on a deep-seated fear. The fear of being alone, the fear of not being enough, and a profound, almost desperate need for external validation.
So if freedom is the metric of true love, then how do we actually perform the test? How can someone who is operating under this assumption of intense love figure out if they're actually coming from a place of fear and need? We can use what we call the foundational test of happiness. And this requires radical honesty with yourself.
Okay.
If you feel that, even hypothetically, you cannot imagine living happily without your partner, and the mere thought of their permanent loss causes you outright panic, you are very likely operating from emotional dependency.
And we're not just talking about sadness here.
No, not at all. Think of the symptoms we're looking for. It's not just deep sadness or missing them. It's heart palpitations, cognitive disruption, a real inability to function, and this absolute conviction that your life as an entity is over without them.
So it's the difference between feeling deep pain, which is, of course, normal after a loss,
Yeah.
and feeling, what, existential paralysis.
Exactly. That's the perfect word for it. Healthy love involves missing someone deeply, mourning their absence, but recognizing that your own core self, your foundation, it remains intact.
You're still you.
You're still you. Dependence assumes the partner is necessary for emotional and psychological survival, much like a prosthetic limb, not just preferred for joy and companionship. That panic is the signal. It's the signal that the partner has become functionally integrated into your internal operating system.
And once that panic takes root, the entire dynamic of the relationship just shifts. It becomes one of extreme imbalance.
Mm-hmm.
The dependent person is effectively, externalizing their security, their self-worth.
Precisely. In that dynamic, the reliant person often sinks into a submissive, passive, or overly solicitous role.
Mm-hmm.
They become incapable of independent decision-making because their fear of making a wrong choice, a choice that might displease the partner, is just too high. They constantly seek validation and security from the partner, turning them into a perpetual judge or an emotional regulator.
That's the part that is so destructive, that inevitable self-abandonment.
It's the ultimate cost. This reliance leads directly to self-abandonment, where the dependent person loses the ability to define their own worth, their own preferences, or even make choices based on their own best interest.
Wow.
They surrender their internal agency and autonomy in this silent, desperate exchange for what they perceive as stability and continued presence. They stop asking, "What do I want?" And they only ask, "What must I do to keep them here?"
And that must create an impossible burden on the other partner, even if that partner is a perfectly healthy, supportive person.
Oh, it
I
does.
mean, no single human being can sustain the role of being this sole regulator for another person's entire internal world.
That's a key insight. Even if the partner is loving, they will inevitably fail that impossible standard. And this brings us to the mandate of healthy love. A truly supportive relationship has to actively encourage and support external connections.
Your friends, your family.
Your friends, your family, your interest, your solo pursuits. It must maintain both partners' independence and their individual sense of identity. If a relationship demands isolation, or if you feel you have to constantly shrink or mute or diminish yourself to fit into it, that dynamic is fundamentally toxic. It doesn't matter how intense the feelings are.
It sounds like love is naturally an expansive force that opens up your world, whereas dependence is this deeply constrictive, suffocating force that shrinks your world down to just the two of you.
That is the perfect analogy. Healthy love provides a safe, grounded base from which you can go explore the rest of the world and engage with your individual life. Dependency shrinks your world and your identity down to the size of the relationship, making the partner simultaneously your prison guard and your only source of oxygen.
If this is so destructive, where does it even come from? Is this just learned behavior, or is it driven by something deeper, some underlying deficits?
Psychological analysis suggests that dependency, well, it rarely takes hold in a vacuum. It almost always manifests when individuals enter the relationship already carrying pre-existing emotional deficits.
What?
The most common one is a low sense of self-worth or an inner emptiness. This can be rooted in historical trauma, but often it's simply a lack of robust self-acceptance. When people lack internal stability and orientation, they search for it externally, and the partner becomes the sole source of this missing self-value.
So they're essentially trying to plug an internal hole with an external person.
Precisely. And this makes them profoundly vulnerable. They confuse intense affection, which feels like being seen or needed for the first time, with actual, healthy mutual support. That desperate search for stability and safety is what paves the way for emotional submission.
That's interesting.
What's fascinating is that this can affect high-functioning individuals. Someone might be incredibly successful and confident in every other area of their life, a CEO, a brilliant artist. Yet, in a romantic context, these underlying emotional vulnerabilities can be activated, causing them to behave in ways that seem completely contradictory to their capabilities in the outside world.
Wow. So it's not just limited to people who struggle across the board.
Not at all. This is why we have to address the root psychological wounds, not just the relationship symptoms. It can be a hidden vulnerability just waiting for the right kind of relationship to trigger it.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We've dissected the underlying mechanism of dependence. Now let's look at the applied evidence. We've identified 6 major warning signs, these concrete behaviors and cognitive distortions that indicate love has crossed that line into unhealthy, consuming territory.
And these signs are observable reflections of that internal collapse of boundaries and the destruction of individual identity that occurs when fear, not freedom, becomes the driver of the relationship.
Okay, let's start with number 1, excessive obsessive thoughts. So what defines excessive?
Thinking about a partner is, of course, a delightful and normal part of romantic engagement, but the line is crossed when this preoccupation interferes demonstrably with your daily functioning.
It's not just a passing thought.
No, we're not talking about fleeting thoughts. We're talking about a constant, grinding mental noise where it becomes genuinely difficult to focus on work, on hobbies, on self-care, or even just listening to other people speak.
It's like having a radio on full blast in your head, constantly tuned to one station.
Exactly. And the content of that mental noise is crucial. It's a deep dive into overanalyzing everything the partner says or does, searching for hidden meanings, calculating the exact probability of reciprocation, or replaying past interactions to spot some supposed slight. This isn't rational processing, it's a frantic emotional calculation.
And this leads directly to the core concept of construction.
Yes, the focus of this obsession is often a mental construction of the loved one. It's an idealized avatar, rather than seeing the person clearly as they are, flaws, Complex, humanity, all of it.
So you're not in love with the person, but the idea of them.
The dependent person builds a narrative around who they need the partner to be, and they desperately seek evidence to support that fantasy. The reality of the person is secondary, which makes the dependent person blind to genuine red flags. They are in love with a potentiality, not a person.
Okay, moving to the second sign. Isolation and loss of social circles. You touched on this earlier, but let's elaborate on how insidious this process really is.
Well, when dependency sets in, the partner becomes so central to one's security that the individual actually starts to self-isolate. It often starts subtly.
Like canceling plans with friends.
Exactly. Canceling plans with friends to be available for the partner, prioritizing the partner's trivial needs over family obligations, and just gradually letting those external contacts fade entirely. The partner quickly becomes priority number 1, 2, and 3.
But the danger isn't just missing your friends, it's systemic, right?
It is a systemic danger because this loss of a social safety network increases the individual's reliance on the partner exponentially. Friends and family provide perspective, they give you objective reality checks, and vital comfort.
And if you don't have that,
If you have systematically dismantled everyone else in your life, your fear of rejection or loss from that partner is amplified because losing them means losing everything. This just fuels the dependency cycle, trapping you further. A healthy relationship should always be an addition to your life, never a replacement for it.
sign number 3 is maybe the most definitive, practical marker of self-abandonment. Blurring or absence of personal boundaries.
This is the moment the self starts to disappear. Boundaries are vital personal limits, physical, emotional, time-based, digital, or financial, that define what you are and are not okay with. When unhealthy love takes hold, these limits just dissolve.
And sometimes they're pushed by a partner, but you're saying often they're dissolved willingly.
Often willingly, yes.
So what does that look like day to day?
It manifests as constantly sacrificing your own comfort or needs, excessively prioritizing the partner's demands, feeling directly responsible for their emotional state or happiness, or feeling obligated to fix all their problems.
Big or small?
Whether they are minor issues or deeply entrenched life failures. If you are constantly walking on eggshells or feel like your main purpose is mood management, just trying to anticipate and neutralize any potential negativity from your partner, your boundaries are gone.
It's interesting how often dependent individuals mistake this boundarylessness for profound intimacy or devotion.
They view it as proof of their love. Look how much I give up for you. But establishing clear, respectful limits is fundamental. Setting boundaries defines self-respect, and counterintuitively, it builds genuine, sustainable trust within the relationship.
A healthy partner should respect those limits.
A healthy partner respects those limits. If you have no boundaries, you have no self to bring to the relationship. You become a mirror, not a person.
The fourth sign is a severe physical manifestation of this collapse, neglect of self-care and well-being.
This is a classic indicator that the psychological toll is registering physically. The dependent individual will neglect their own routines, their personal interests, exercise, sleep, all to prioritize the partner's desires, needs, or schedule.
And the unconscious thinking is what? If I'm perfect for them, they'll stay.
Their core unconscious philosophy is often, if I dedicate myself entirely to my partner's happiness, they will stay and I will be safe.
But the body simply cannot sustain that level of chronic psychological stress based on someone else's moods.
It absolutely can't. The consequences of this chronic self-neglect are profound and often physical. The body reacts to constant anxiety and emotional suppression with tangible symptoms.
Like what?
Chronic exhaustion, severe sleep disturbances like insomnia or fragmented sleep, difficulty concentrating because of that constant mental noise we talked about, headaches, and even the onset of clinical anxiety disorders or depression. You cannot sustain a state of total dedication to someone else without experiencing a significant breakdown of your own health. The simple truth is, love should be a healthy reflection of how you love and care for yourself. If you are emptying your tank for them, it's not love, it's service.
Sign number 5 gets back to that crucial cognitive distortion we mentioned. Idealization and enabling toxic traits.
This is where critical judgment becomes profoundly, dangerously clouded. The dependent individual starts overlooking, excusing, minimizing, or actively enabling toxic behaviors, disrespect, or even mistreatment.
And it's not malicious.
Not at all. It's fueled by that intense love, but more powerfully by the paralyzing fear of loss. The brain manufactures a distortion to protect the illusion that the relationship is safe and sustainable.
And you mentioned the concept of crystallization here, which explains how the brain performs that distortion.
Yes, crystallization perfectly details this phenomenon. It's the process by which a loved person's flaws are either completely ignored, denied, or paradoxically enhanced and transformed into positive attributes in the observer's mind.
Can you give an example?
Sure. A partner's irresponsibility with money becomes endearing spontaneity. Or their emotional volatility and quick temper become passion or intensity. Their possessiveness becomes devotion.
So the brain is actively rewriting the script to make the bad parts acceptable.
Exactly. This clouding of judgment enables harmful tolerance, making the individual overlook fundamental incompatibilities, deal breakers, and even abusive behavior. To maintain a healthy perspective, it is absolutely essential to maintain a clear, realistic view of the partner, not just the highly edited, idealized image you have constructed.
Finally, sign number 6, emotional volatility and turmoil.
The dependent relationship is inherently unstable. It is not a sanctuary. It is a constant, dramatic, emotional roller coaster. It's defined by frequent extreme highs and punishing lows.
And why is that? Why is it so volatile?
The reason for this pervasive turmoil is structural. The dependent person's happiness, their security, their entire sense of self-worth are entirely externalized and made dependent on the partner's approval, mood, or attention.
So if their partner has a bad day, the dependent person is instantly dragged into the emotional wreckage.
Precisely. A simple slight, a slightly delayed text, or a partner's bad mood can feel like an existential catastrophe to the dependent person. When the partner is attentive, they feel ecstatic walking on air. When the partner is rejecting, distant, or critical, the person is immediately plummeted into misery and anxiety.
Which is the opposite of what love should do.
Right. Healthy love, in contrast, should affirm your self-esteem and provide a stable emotional foundation. It should add to your well-being, not tear it down with constant, exhausting anxiety over whether you are good enough today.
We've established what this destructive dynamic looks like on the surface. The exhausting roller coaster, the lost self. Now we need to move deeper into why these behaviors take hold. We need to explore the root causes in the individual and how those vulnerabilities interact with the world, specifically with a potentially toxic partner.
This shift is vital because these behaviors are not arbitrary choices. They are deeply ingrained, unconscious strategies that are developed in an attempt to compensate for profound emotional deficits or historical wounds.
Okay, let's start with the core wounds that drive dependency, starting with the pervasive self-worth deficit.
This is the foundation upon which dependency is built. The most pervasive driver is a deeply rooted sense of inadequacy. The relationship is unconsciously used as a coping mechanism, an emotional crutch, to compensate for feelings of inner emptiness or a lack of self-acceptance.
So the attention from the partner is like a temporary fix.
It's a temporary salve for that inner wound. We often see this as carrying a hole in your center that you hope someone else will fill.
And the unconscious thought process is profoundly damaging, isn't it?
It is. The internal narrative, which is often hidden even from the individual themselves, is, I am not whole, and without a partner to make me whole, I am not lovable, and therefore I am worthless. When you define your worth through external validation, you are handing total control of your emotional life to the partner. This vulnerability makes people susceptible to accepting any attention, even painful, negative, or controlling attention, simply because it confirms their existence in the partner's life.
That deep hole in the center inevitably triggers the second core wound, this intense fear of abandonment.
That is Verlustangst, which is the clinical term for the intense pathological fear of loss. These fears rarely appear without history. They often stem from unresolved past experiences.
Like what? Childhood issues.
Perhaps childhood loss, inconsistent parenting, emotional neglect, or severe abandonment in previous partnerships. This historical trauma drives exaggerated, often irrational efforts to hold on to the current partner at all costs. The goal is to ensure that the past pain of abandonment is never, ever repeated.
So the dependent behavior, all the overgiving, the self-sacrifice, it's fundamentally a desperate attempt at historical correction.
Absolutely. The need to avoid being single, lonely, or alone becomes so overwhelming that it traps individuals in relationships that are actively, obviously harmful to them. They stay not because the relationship is good, but because the alternative facing the original wound of abandonment feels psychologically deadly.
Moving from these internal wounds to external behavior, let's discuss the Elper syndrome. This is such a common and profoundly destructive pattern in dependent individuals.
It's highly common. The helper syndrome is defined by an individual's excessive, often relentless, and frequently unrequested assistance to others. These individuals struggle immensely to say no, to set boundaries for their own energy, or to acknowledge their own legitimate needs or weaknesses.
They're driven to take on other people's burdens.
Yes. But if they are constantly giving, does that make them selfless? The motivation is the key differentiator.
Right.
The helping behavior is an unconscious strategy, rooted in that fundamental lack of acceptance or support they likely experienced earlier in life. They use service to secure recognition, gratitude, and a sense of being needed and valuable. The dependent person feels worthy only when they are sacrificing themselves for someone else's benefit.
And it gives them a sense of purpose.
It provides a temporary moral or intellectual sense of superiority. They are the strong one, the problem solver, the one who is indispensable. And the person they are helping is necessarily positioned as the weak one, the one with the problem. That creates a very rigid power dynamic.
It's a trap.
It is. And the most insidious function of this syndrome is avoidance. The constant outward focus on the needs and overwhelming problems of others prevents the helper from having to confront or deal with their own psychological problems, their deep loneliness, or their dissatisfaction with their own life path.
They're too busy fixing someone else.
They're too busy, too exhausted, and too focused on fixing someone else's life to notice their own ship is taking on water. It's a masterful mechanism of self-distraction. This might look like constantly bailing out a partner financially, taking over their career responsibilities, or doing all of their emotional labor to smooth over their conflicts with others.
So now, it's a vulnerable individual carrying a self-worth deficit and operating under this helper syndrome encounters a toxic individual, particularly one with narcissistic traits. The dynamic is almost perfectly engineered for destruction. Let's explore the toxic partnership.
Toxic individuals, especially those high in narcissistic traits, are highly intuitive about vulnerability. They consciously or unconsciously seek partners who are easily manipulated, eager to please, and who possess low self-esteem.
The perfect supply.
The perfect supply. The dependent person's willingness to self-sacrifice makes them an ideal, low-resistance target. The selection process is less about love and more about finding a power source.
That's a stark but accurate way to put it.
Once the toxic relationship begins, the dominant narcissistic partner deploys a toolkit of manipulative techniques designed to ensure continued control and dependence. Their objective is to isolate and diminish the partner's sense of self-worth so that they become completely reliant.
What are the most common control tactics they use?
The tactics are designed to keep the dependent person perpetually off balance and feeling inadequate. They use unwarranted criticism and humiliation, often mocking the dependent person's emotions, boundaries, or legitimate concerns.
And the isolation piece is key.
They systematically isolate them by badmouthing friends and family, arguing that only the narcissist truly understands or cares for them, dismantling that crucial social support network.
And the most devastating tool of control, emotional withdrawal.
Absolutely. This is the withholding of affection, attention, or validation, what we call love withdrawal. Affection is suddenly and deliberately withheld as a punishment or a highly effective means of control.
And because the dependent person needs that validation.
Because their self-worth is externalized, they will work exponentially harder, sacrificing more and more to regain the dominant partner's approval and that crucial temporary feeling of safety.
That entire dynamic must lead to a constant state of exhaustion, which brings us to the conflict cycle.
The conflict is continuous, and it is entirely one-sided. The dynamic leads to constant exhaustion because the dominant partner prioritizes their needs ruthlessly and refuses to try to understand the dependent partner's viewpoint during arguments.
They use blame shifting, gaslighting.
Blame shifting, gaslighting, and the refusal to reflect on their own behavior. This means the dependent partner is constantly depleted of emotional energy, spending all their time reacting to manufactured crises while receiving nothing stable or supportive back. In a toxic relationship, who you are is systematically diminished, and you are forced to spend immense, unsustainable energy simply upholding the facade of the partnership. We've established the structural problems of emotional dependency. Now we must turn to the psychological state that represents the most intense, consuming form of romantic obsession. Limerence.
Limerence.
Okay. This is the clinical term for the mental state of being madly in love or intensely infatuated, specifically characterized by the longing for a potential mate when a reciprocation of that feeling is not guaranteed.
This sounds like the difference between deep, mutual love and a volatile, Unrequited fixation.
Exactly. Limerence is characterized by highly intrusive thoughts, intense idealization of the person who we call the limerent object, or LO, and a powerful, overwhelming longing for mutual reciprocation. It is what we traditionally called lovesickness, where the entire emotional state of the individual is rigidly dictated by the perceived actions, attention, or mood of the person they desire.
You mentioned earlier that this is less like an emotion and more like an addiction. Let's unpack that neurobiology, because that's where it gets truly fascinating.
The modern psychological view compares intense romantic obsession, particularly limerence, directly to a behavioral addiction, similar to gambling or the early stages of chemical dependency. Yes. Brain scans of individuals in this state show significant activation in the brain's dopamine-rich reward systems, specifically the ventral tegmental area, or VTA.
That's the brain's main pleasure and motivation center.
Precisely. This activation generates intense incentive salience, which is the compulsive wanting or drive toward the elo. It's not necessarily about the pleasure received, it's about the frantic, compelled drive to acquire the reward, or, more accurately, the relief.
This distinction between wanting and liking is crucial here.
It separates love from obsession. In this addictive state, one can intensely want the person, feel that undeniable compulsive drive toward them, even when the actual interactions are painful, anxiety-inducing, or genuinely unpleasant.
So you could feel miserable with them, but still crave them.
Exactly. You might feel drained after every interaction with the illo, yet the moment they are gone, the craving returns. The primary motivation shifts from genuinely seeking pleasure in their presence to desperately seeking relief from the acute pain of separation or rejection. The brain is screaming, "Get the substance!"
And when this wanting is blocked or uncertain, it spirals into lovesickness.
Lovesickness is the debilitating physical and mental state that results when limerence is either unreciprocated or intermittently challenged. It's marked by chronic, addictive cravings, persistent, intrusive thinking that crowds out all other thoughts, severe melancholy, and sometimes profound clinical or depression and self-isolation.
That is physical too.
The physical toll is immense. You might experience trembling, flushing, a pounding heart, sleepless nights, or an inability to focus. It's truly disruptive to normal life, affecting job performance, academic success, and social engagement.
So if the experience is so painful, what keeps the brain hooked? If it were simple pain, you'd think the brain would learn to avoid it.
The engine of limerence is a precise, volatile formula. It requires both a flicker of hope and a massive amount of uncertainty to intensify and maintain the compulsion.
Hope and uncertainty.
Yes. The lack of a clear, definitive rejection combined with some minimal, often ambiguous evidence of interest is the necessary fuel. If there was zero hope, the feeling would eventually extinguish. If there was complete certainty and sustained, stable reciprocation, the state would transition into the calm of companionate love.
So mixed messages, the hot and cold treatment, are the perfect ignition source.
They are the master key. This uncertainty functions precisely like intermittent reinforcement in a slot machine or a gambling setting. Because the rewards, a text message, a brief shared glance, an unexpected moment of closeness, are unpredictable and random, the brain remains constantly hooked, preventing habituation. The dopamine anticipation system stays on high alert, waiting for the next hit.
Which explains things like breadcrumbing.
Exactly. Modern dating tactics like breadcrumbing, where the LO sends occasional minimal contact to keep the admirer stringing along, can sustain the limerent state indefinitely. The dependent person lives for the potentiality of the next reward.
And we know that barriers and adversity actually intensify this state, the classic Romeo and Juliet effect.
This is the most counterintuitive part. Conflict, parental interference, social barriers, or even the LO's blatant unsuitability as a partner do not diminish the limerent feelings. In fact, they often increase the intensity.
That's fascinating.
This is known as frustration attraction, where the perceived difficulty or delayed anticipation prolongs the firing of those addictive dopamine neurons. The stress and panic of separation or rejection actually activate the body's stress axis, which ironically contributes to the addictive survival-based drive toward the LO. The brain translates difficulty as destiny.
Let's return to crystallization as the cognitive feature of limerence, because it's what keeps the addiction locked in place.
Crystallization ensures that the observer sees the LO in the most favorable light, to the exclusion of all else. The O's flaws are systematically ignored, minimized, or actively enhanced. This cognitive bias is a major impediment to recovery because the person is addicted to an unreal construction, a ghost, not the reality of the person.
And the fantasy is perfect.
Since the fantasy is perfect, the need to pursue it never ends. To break free, a painful, conscious reality check seeing the person accurately with all their imperfections is not just helpful, it is necessary.
If someone is struggling with this, what is the typical timeline? Does limerence burn forever?
Fortunately, no. The state of limerence, when unrequited or volatile, most commonly endures between 18 months and 3 years. That 2 to 3 year window is often cited as the typical duration for early, volatile, passionate love before it settles or expires.
And how does the resolution happen?
Limerence naturally fades in three primary ways. First, when all hope, that crucial ingredient, is completely and utterly extinguished and the brain gives up on the pursuit. This often requires strict no contact. Second, when sustained, stable, and believable reciprocation occurs, and the relationship transitions toward the predictability of long-term attachment companionate love. The uncertainty engine dies. And third, when the feelings simply shift to a new person, which can happen if the LO continues to provide intermittent reinforcement, preventing the first pathway from being utilized. The removal of that hope and uncertainty is the key to psychological liberation.
That was a deep and sometimes painful look at the problem, the mechanisms of dependence, fixation, and obsession. Now we turn our focus entirely to solutions, the practical, actionable steps for breaking these patterns of self-loss and dependency. This is about establishing a clear path back to a vibrant, self-determined life.
And this transition is not passive. It requires deliberate, often uncomfortable effort and patience. It's crucial to remember that overcoming emotional dependency is not an overnight fix. It is a process of intensive personal development. But it is the single most crucial commitment you can make to your future happiness.
Let's begin where the problem begins to dissolve: communication or assertive self-advocacy.
Many people who struggle with dependency have been conditioned to fear conflict. They equate harmony and avoidance of confrontation with love. To reclaim independence, you have to move away from that fear and consciously practice expressing your own needs clearly and confidently.
It's about being assertive, not aggressive.
Exactly. Assertive communication is about standing up for yourself without being aggressive toward the other person.
So what's the practical advice for someone who freezes up when they need to state a boundary?
You must use I statements to express your feelings and needs while owning your experience. So instead of saying, "You never give me space and you overwhelm me," you try. "I feel anxious and drained when we spend every evening together. I need 2 hours tomorrow night alone to recharge."
It's less of an attack.
It allows for vulnerability and mutual understanding, establishing clear limits without blame. Effective communication is the basis for mutual understanding and respect, and it is a muscle that must be worked out daily.
And what happens when a partner tests those limits? Because if they are used to boundarylessness, they will inevitably push back.
This is perhaps the most critical moment of reckoning. You must recognize when a partner disrespects clearly set limits. If they try to guilt you, "If you loved me, you wouldn't need space," or cross those lines repeatedly, mock your needs, or try to turn your boundary setting into your fault,
That's a huge red flag.
that indicates a foundational systemic problem in the relationship. You must stop accepting that behavior. Real love never requires you to compromise your comfort, safety, or core self-worth. It requires recognition and respect.
Next, we need to talk about carving out radical self-focus and exploration. If your identity was lost in the relationship, you have to actively search for it again.
Exactly. If you only exist in relation to them, you must intentionally prioritize time and space to find yourself. Personal time is not a luxury. It is essential for reflection, for refueling, and self-care. It must be scheduled and non-negotiable time without the partner, and time dedicated solely to you.
And this isn't just about binging Netflix. It's about rediscovering the things that make you you.
It is about actively rediscovering your separate identity. Re-engage with old hobbies that vanished when the relationship started, or explore new individual growth opportunities. Learn a new skill. Plan a solo adventure or trip, or join a club that aligns purely with your interests where your partner is not involved.
These things boost your self-esteem.
They reestablish individuality, demonstrate your self-sufficiency, and provide tangible evidence that your identity exists entirely outside the partnership.
We also must stress the practical component of autonomy, especially financial health.
Financial independence is an often overlooked but absolutely crucial component of autonomy and self-confidence. If one partner controls all the finances, the other's fear of loss is dramatically amplified because the consequence of leaving or being left is not just emotional but survival-based.
So it's about having options.
Working toward financial independence, maintaining your own accounts, building savings, having control over your income mitigates the risk of debilitating dependency and gives you the freedom and choice to pursue your own goals and leave if necessary. This isn't about suspicion, it's about self-respect.
Moving on to strengthening the core self. This involves healing that initial wound of low self-worth.
This is the internal work that supports all the external boundary setting. You need to actively work to transform the self-worth deficit by transforming your internal narrative. This means actively identifying and challenging negative self-talk and consciously practicing positive affirmations.
The goal is to stop needing their approval.
The goal is to move beyond needing approval. True, lasting self-acceptance is the key to deep happiness because it reduces the reliance on external validation from the partner. You realize fundamentally you are inherently worthwhile, regardless of their mood, their presence, or their approval.
And for those struggling specifically with the addictive grinding thoughts of limerence, what cognitive technique can help interrupt that intrusive obsession?
We recommend conscious strategies of love regulation, specifically negative reappraisal. When you find yourself obsessing or daydreaming about the idealized partner, when that crystallization process begins, you consciously interrupt that thought pattern. You actively refuse the fantasy and focus intensely on their negative traits, their specific flaws, or the unsatisfactory, painful aspects of the relationship.
So, if I feel the urge to obsessively replay a happy memory, I need to force my brain to replay the memory where they were selfish or where they failed to support me.
Precisely. You focus on the times they were inconsiderate, the arguments where they refused to understand your view, their negative habits that genuinely annoyed you, or the way they consistently made you feel small. This conscious focus on reality and negative aspects helps diminish the infatuation and weakens the addictive reward cycle.
You're spoiling the fantasy.
Think of it as consciously spoiling the flavor of the fantasy. The goal is to make the obsession unappealing cognitively.
Finally, the necessity of seeking external support. You can't climb out of a hole you dug alone.
You absolutely cannot. If isolation has been part of the pattern, you need to deliberately reinvest energy in friends, family, and your broader social network. This rebuilt social support system is vital. It provides perspective, it offers objective reality checks because they see the reality you might be blind to, and it provides a safety net during stressful periods or separation.
They're your mirror and your anchor.
Exactly. And if the deep-seated issues, the trauma, the verbose angst feel overwhelming,
Then professional help is necessary.
then professional guidance is essential.
Yeah.
Seeking therapy or counseling to address those root causes, childhood wounds, ingrained relational trauma, or chronic low self-worth. It is crucial to clarify that seeking this kind of help is not a sign of failure or weakness. It is a profound sign of strength, of self-respect, and a commitment to radical self-change. The road to overcoming emotional dependency takes time, but the outcome is a much richer, more vibrant, and self-determined life.
We've taken a deep dive today into the razor-thin line that separates intense, beautiful passion from destructive, obsessive attachment. We understand now that the intensity isn't the measure of quality. The true indicator of relational health is whether the dynamic expands your life and affirms your identity, or shrinks it down into a suffocating space defined by fear. Clarity, self-respect, and boundaries are not optional extras. They are the non-negotiable components of true, sustainable relational health.
Indeed. We want to underscore that overcoming emotional dependency is first and foremost a process of self-healing and personal development that takes immense time, conscious effort, and deep patience. You must be as kind to yourself in this process as you desperately wanted to be to your partner.
Right.
The ultimate goal is to find a healthy midpoint where you can thrive completely as an individual and fully enjoy the mutual support, connection, and joy of being a partner. That is the true definition of love.
So as you reflect on everything we've unpacked today, the warning signs, the roots, and the action plan, here's a final thought for you to carry forward.
Remember that you deserve a relationship where you are celebrated for your whole, complex, messy self, not one that requires you to constantly shrink or vanish into the identity of another. If love demands that you completely give up your self-worth and your individuality, what is it truly costing you? And are you willing to pay that price indefinitely?